listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, she's the former TV host who's now become Japan's first female PM. But many experts are saying it's not a win for women and she has a challenging job ahead, trying to turn around a tanking economy and a cost of living crisis. All those details coming up. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Thursday, the 23rd of October. There are calls for a new police investigation into the decades-old cold case of missing toddler Cheryl Grimmer, after a New South Wales MP today named the man who confessed to killing the toddler. Jeremy Buckingham used parliamentary privilege to name the suspect in Parliament and also read out his chilling confession. Cheryl vanished from Fairy Meadow Beach near Wollongong, south of Sydney in 1970. A year later, the man, who was then 17, admitted to killing the toddler, but authorities dismissed his claim. In 2017, the man pleaded not guilty after he was charged with Cheryl's murder. The case was later dropped because the New South Wales Supreme Court ruled his confession as inadmissible. The United Nations top court has ruled that Israel must allow aid groups unrestricted access to Gaza, saying its efforts to block UN agencies are illegal under international law. The International Court of Justice found unanimously that Palestinians in Gaza have been denied essentials for daily life and that Israel cannot shut down or obstruct the UN Relief and Works Agency. Israel has accused the agency of being infiltrated by Hamas and closed its offices in East Jerusalem. But the court says there is no evidence the agency's neutrality has been compromised. And journalist Michael Wolff, known for his explosive Trump exposés, has filed a lawsuit against US First Lady Melania Trump, accusing her of trying to silence him over his reporting on the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. The move comes after Melania sued Wolff for $1.5 billion, claiming he defamed her by suggesting she was very involved in Epstein's social circle and acted behind the scenes on related matters. In his counterclaim, Wolff says the Trumps have a pattern of using costly legal threats to intimidate journalists and that his comments were fair opinion and legitimate inquiry, not defamation. He insists he never accused Melania of any crimes, only of having social ties to Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump before their marriage. Wolff took to social media to announce his filing and also asks the court to let him question both Melania and Donald Trump under oath about their relationship with Epstein.
I'd like nothing better than to get Donald Trump and Melania Trump under oath in front of a court reporter and actually find out all of the details of their relationship with Epstein.
In a statement, a spokesperson for Melania Trump says, quote, she was standing up to those who spread malicious falsehoods. Now it's time to get into our deep dive on Japan's new Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi. The 64-year-old is the country's first female PM with a huge social media following and is also a seasoned media performer. But Sanae is ultra-conservative, supporting traditional family values. So can the new PM, who models herself on former hardline British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, turn Japan around? Joining us to tell us more from Tokyo is ABC's North Asia correspondent, James Oaten. James, thanks so much for joining us. So much happening in the world right now with politics, and Japan has elected its first female prime minister. Is this good or bad news?
Well, it depends on your perspective. Sanae Takaichi, first of all, and importantly for the headlines, is Japan's first female prime minister. And this is in a country where men dominate senior roles in the parliament. They dominate parliament more broadly, and they dominate senior roles in businesses as well. This is a very male-dominant country. And when we look at gender equality in Japan, Japan consistently ranks low. It's about 118th out of 148 countries for gender equality. And female representation in politics is one of the big issues. In the lower house, for instance, just under 16% of seats are occupied by women, and it's particularly bad on the conservative side. So to have the first female prime minister in Japan is a big deal for Japan. The question, though, from that is A, is this a win for women? And B, what direction is she taking Japan and the ruling Liberal Democratic Party?
James, you make a couple of great points there, because when you actually start to look at her stance on certain issues, one would say she is ultra-conservative. For example, does not support women actually keeping their maiden names. She is supportive of women taking their husbands' names.
Yeah, look, one of the great lines I've heard since she was elected into this role is that she got the job despite being a woman rather than because she's a woman. She is a hardline conservative and does come from the hard conservative faction of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party. So the LDP, one fun fact about them is that they've been in power almost continuously. There's two exceptions, but almost continuously since 1955. It is a conservative party, but a bit like the Liberal Party in Australia, it's a broad church. You've got your moderates and you've got your conservatives, and there's various factions. Well, she's up the conservative end of this. And her mentor was Shinzo Abe, a very hardline, hawkish conservative. And that's one of the reasons she would have been picked for this role, is that she does perhaps represent a Shinzo Abe-esque approach to politics and an outlook in the world. And so her supporters would have got behind her because she's the closest to Shinzo Abe they could get. In terms of her policies, yes, you are right, she is quite conservative. And you will hear a lot of comparisons between her and Margaret Thatcher because she's a fan of Margaret Thatcher. And like Margaret Thatcher, they're both conservative socially. They're both each country's respective first female prime minister. In terms of some of the issues that you've highlighted, in Japan, married couples cannot have different surnames. Now, she is opposed to changing that rule. What that does mean is that women overwhelmingly have to adopt the man's name, the husband's name. And that's something that she just doesn't want to change. So that's one of the examples of how she is quite conservative. She has previously spoken in depth about how she believes in traditional family structures, certainly against same-sex marriage. And she also voted in the past against legislation that would allow a female emperor. Interesting to note that Japan did have female emperors once upon a time. But there's this period of over 100 years ago called the Meiji era, where Japan essentially copied and pasted a lot of ideas from the West because it needed to catch up with the West, right? And one of those ideas was that only a man could be the emperor. So since then, only men can be the emperor in Japan. And as it stands, that's something she supports.
So, James, what's the general consensus there then? You know, one may argue this is a great win for women. She is the first female prime minister, but then someone else may say this is a huge swing to conservative and that she's not actually being a feminist for female voters on the ground. What would you say to that?
I don't think she would call herself a feminist. And I think this is one of the things where Japan's first female prime minister, it gets a lot of headlines, particularly with the international media, but the fundamental issue in Japan that she needs to address is the cost of living. So I'll get onto that in a moment. From the perspective of having a female prime minister, it is symbolically important. It will tell women that, yes, finally you too can also become the leader of Japan. But ultimately, the structures and particularly the culture of Japan make it very hard for women to rise to the top. One of the great examples is a thing in Japan called mama harassment, which is, first of all, women still here in Japan overwhelmingly take a lot of the traditional roles, cooking, cleaning, child rearing, child caring. And there is a lot of expectations on women to do those roles. Even if there are generational change, it is still quite highly expected that women fulfill these roles. And there is this pressure inside workplaces in Japan to not take time off work. And when you're a mum and you need to take time off for your kids, especially after giving birth, it's kind of frowned upon. That's the expectation. The laws are here, right? You can take time off. There is maternity and paternity care here, but a lot of women and men just feel this pressure that I've got to keep turning up to work and show the boss how dedicated I am. And when you get to that crunchy moment between trying to be a mother and turning up for work, it's just too hard for many. And they fear if they take time off work, they'll be demoted or given pretty average jobs. So many leave, and there is high statistics about women leaving the workplace. So that's a cultural problem in Japan. And when you speak to the experts about what Sanae Takaichi can do about that, well, she will symbolize that women can rise to the top. And that is important. We shouldn't dismiss that or underplay that. But whether she will do enough to change that culture, there's some serious doubt. And especially that, as one expert told me, she's giving the image of suck it up and work harder, because that's what she's going to do. She has a huge job ahead of her. As I mentioned before, cost of living, which we'll get onto in a moment, is a big problem in Japan. And she's told people that she's going to sacrifice her work-life balance and she's going to work. Now, that's great if you're the Prime Minister and people expect that as the elected representative. But for your average family who is trying to manage children and work and stuff and get a work-life balance, what's she going to do to help them? Well, we just don't know at this stage.
So, James, on the cost of living situation, has the Prime Minister put any suggestions forward on how she's going to deal with this? Because like the rest of the world, this is the number one issue for so many people.
Yeah, and Japan's in a unique situation because Japan had a huge economic collapse in the late 80s, early 90s. And since then, the economy's just been pretty flat. Wages have been flat. And the yen, the currency here in Japan, is weak. And so what you have there is that Japan has been stuck in a bit of a time warp in terms of wages and the cost of living. And as an Australian, if you come to Japan, you'll notice that. You'll see the cost of things feel like they're from 10, 15 years ago. Well, kind of in a way, that's because they are. What's happening now, though, in Japan is they're being bitten by inflation. Japan has not had inflation for decades. And so now you've got flat wages with inflation. That is poison. That is really hurtful to families. Rice, there's been a rice shortage. The staple of Japan costs almost doubling. So the cost of living here is a major problem. And because Japan has been so kind of flat for so long. So much of the attention really on Sanae Takaichi is what will she do as Prime Minister to address these issues? Now, I mentioned before that Sanae Takaichi is a fan of Margaret Thatcher, and you will hear a lot of those comparisons in the media between her and Margaret Thatcher. The key difference between her and Margaret Thatcher is Margaret Thatcher was a saver. Sanae Takaichi is a spender. So she's already talking about tax cuts, of course, but spending, wise, aggressive spending to get the economy back on track. So that is the big challenge. It comes from her idol, Shinzo Abe, and it's called Abenomics. But essentially, rather than fixing the economy by tightening the belt, tightening the budgetary belt, she's going to spend where she feels it needs to be done to get the economy going. It'll be a little bit harder, though, because now the ruling Liberal Democratic Party has had to form a new political alliance. They now have a new alliance with the Japan Innovation Party. They're more on the right wing. So again, further lurching to the right for Japan's LDP. They may be a little bit more concerned, though, about, I guess, this spend-a-thon to revive the economy. So it's challenging because they're in minority government. They've got a new political alliance. The economy has been a big problem for not just years, but decades. So she has her work cut out for her.
We will watch with great interest. We appreciate your time. Thanks so much, James.
Thank you.
That was ABC North Asia correspondent James Oaten. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.